Commander Rethus stood on the bridge of his cruiser and watched the human survey ship fall from the sky. The small vessel tumbled through the atmosphere of Kellis 4, leaving a trail of fire and smoke across the orange clouds. It crashed somewhere in the southern desert, throwing up a column of dust that was visible even from orbit. 3 life signs detected, reported the tactical officer. The rest of the crew did not survive the impact. Rethus clicked his mandibles in satisfaction. This was almost too easy. The Valkyrie Empire had been watching human expansion for decades, gathering information about this strange new species that had crawled out of its tiny planet and started spreading across the stars. Now 3 of them had wandered into Valkyrie space, and Rethus had been given permission to capture them for study. "Prepare a strike team," he ordered. 40 soldiers should be more than enough. I want those humans alive, if possible. The strike team landed 3 kilometers from the crash site and began moving toward it on foot. Rethus watched their progress through the helmet cameras of his soldiers. The desert stretched in every direction, flat and featureless except for occasional rock formations that rose from the sand like broken teeth. The sun was brutal. Heat waves made the horizon shimmer and dance. When the strike team reached the crash site, they found the ship torn open like a crushed insect. Bodies of dead humans lay scattered among the wreckage. But the 3 survivors were gone. Their tracks led away from the ship, heading north into the endless desert. "They are running," said squad leader Veth through the communication link. "We are beginning pursuit." Rethus settled into his command chair. He had studied the biological reports on humans. They were soft creatures, made mostly of water and fragile tissue. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. Their only notable feature was their large brains, which they used to build tools and machines. Without their technology, they were helpless. The desert would break them in hours. The first day passed without incident. The Valkyrie soldiers moved quickly across the sand, their 6 legs carrying them at a steady pace. They were built for this kind of terrain. Their homeworld had vast deserts too, and their bodies were designed to conserve water and move efficiently. The humans, by contrast, were slow and clumsy. The gap between hunters and prey closed with every passing hour. But the humans did not stop dot as the sun began to set. Rethus expected the pursuit to end. His soldiers needed rest. Their bodies required a cooling period after extended exertion, and their water reserves needed to be managed carefully. They made camp in the shelter of a rock formation and prepared to resume the chase at dawn. The humans kept walking through the night. When the Valkyrie strike team resumed pursuit the next morning, they discovered that the humans had gained ground. The tracks in the sand showed a steady pace, not fast but constant. The humans had walked through the darkness while the Valkyrie slept. "Interesting," Rethus murmured. "They are more determined than I expected." By midday, the temperature had risen to dangerous levels. The Valkyrie soldiers slowed their pace, seeking shade whenever possible. Their respiratory systems struggled in the dry heat. Several soldiers reported dizziness and fatigue. The tactical officer brought Rethus a troubling report. "Commander, our thermal drones are tracking the humans. They are still moving. They are walking through the hottest part of the day." "That is impossible," Rethus said. "No species can sustain activity in those temperatures without shelter. The humans are doing it, Commander." Rethus pulled up the thermal footage on his display. 3 small figures moved across the burning sand, their bodies glowing with heat on the infrared scanner. But there was something strange about the readings. The humans seemed to be releasing heat from their entire bodies, their skin shimmering with some kind of liquid. "What is that substance covering them?" Rethus asked. "Unknown, Commander. It appears to be coming from their own bodies." Rethus did not understand, but he ordered the pursuit to continue. By the end of the second day, he had lost 6 soldiers. Not to the humans, but to the desert itself. Their bodies had simply given out. The dry air had drained their moisture faster than they could replace it. The heat had overwhelmed their cooling systems. They collapsed in the sand and did not get up again. The humans were still moving. Squad Leader Veth sent a message from the field, and his voice carried something that Rethus had never heard from a Volcari soldier before. It sounded almost like fear. "Commander, they are not stopping. We have been chasing them for 2 days, and they are not stopping. How is this possible? We are faster than them. We are stronger than them. But they just keep walking. They walk and walk and walk. When one of them falls behind, the others carry their supplies until they recover. Then they keep walking." Rethus had no answer. On the 3rd day, more soldiers collapsed. The medics could not save them all. The dry air and constant exertion had pushed their bodies beyond the breaking point. The survivors were exhausted, their movements slow and clumsy. The humans had covered over 300 kilometers on foot. Rethus finally ordered a full retreat. His soldiers needed to resupply, to rest, to recover from the brutal conditions. He told himself that it was a tactical withdrawal, not a defeat. The humans would eventually stop. They had to stop. No creature could keep moving forever. 4 days later, the strike team returned to the desert, refreshed and resupplied. Aerial drones quickly located the humans. They were still walking. The 3 small figures moved across the sand, now wearing improvised coverings made from their own clothing to protect them from the sun. They had found water somehow, perhaps by digging wells or collecting moisture from the air. They looked thin and tired, but they were alive. And they were still moving. Squad leader Veth stood at the edge of the camp and stared at the distant figures through his optical enhancer. His soldiers gathered behind him, watching the humans with growing unease. "How?" one of them whispered. "How are they still going?" No one had an answer. Rethus watched from orbit as his soldiers resumed the pursuit. He was beginning to realize that something was very wrong. The biological reports had described humans as weak and fragile, but they had failed to mention something important. Something that the Volcari had never encountered before. The humans did not know how to stop. The conclave of strategic intelligence met in the central chamber of the orbital station, and the mood was grim. 12 representatives from the Volcari Military Council sat in a circle around the holographic display table, their compound eyes reflecting the images that floated before them. High Analyst Yemeth stood at the center, delivering her report in a voice that struggled to hide her disbelief. "We have lost contact with Commander Rethus's strike team," she said. "All 40 soldiers are either dead, missing, or captured. The humans did not defeat them in combat. They simply outlasted them." The council members shifted uncomfortably. This was not the kind of report they had expected. The Volcari Empire had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy. Their military was efficient, disciplined, and technologically superior. The idea that 3 stranded humans could defeat 40 trained soldiers seemed impossible. "Explain," said Council Leader Morath. His voice was cold and hard. Yemeth pulled up a series of images on the holographic display. They showed Volcari soldiers lying motionless in the sand, their bodies twisted in the final moments of exhaustion. Some had simply collapsed mid-step. Others had crawled into the shade of rocks and never moved again. 23 soldiers died from exhaustion-related organ failure, Yemeth said. Their bodies could not sustain the pace required to catch the humans. 11 died from severe dehydration. The remaining 6 were captured by the humans when they became too weak to resist. Captured? Morath leaned forward, his mandibles clicking with anger. Volcari soldiers do not get captured by primitive species. These ones did, Council Leader. The humans apparently approached them as they lay dying in the sand, gave them water, and took their weapons. The prisoners are now traveling with the humans, who are currently walking toward our 4 base. The council erupted in confused noise. Walking toward the base? The humans had no vehicles, no heavy weapons, no reinforcements. They were still on foot in the middle of a hostile desert. And yet they were not running away. They were advancing. Yemeth waited for the noise to settle before continuing. I have prepared a detailed analysis of human biology that may explain what we are dealing with. She pulled up a new image, a diagram of a human body with annotations in the Volcari language. The council members studied it with growing unease. Humans evolved on a planet with extreme environmental variation, Yemeth explained. Their world has burning deserts, frozen wastelands, dense jungles, and everything in between. Their species adapted to survive in all of these conditions. They are not specialized for any single environment. They are generalists, capable of functioning in almost any situation. She pointed to the diagram of the human skin. Most notably, humans possess an extremely efficient cooling system. Their bodies produce a liquid called sweat, which evaporates from their skin and carries away heat. This allows them to remain active in temperatures that would kill most other species. The council members stared at the diagram in silence. The concept was alien to them. Valkyrie bodies conserved moisture at all costs. The idea of deliberately releasing water through the skin seemed wasteful, even suicidal. But the implications were clear. They can run in the heat, Morris said slowly. They can move when we cannot. Correct, Yemeth said. But there is more. Human ancestors developed a hunting technique that relied on a single advantage. They could not outrun their prey in a sprint. They were not strong enough to fight large animals directly. So they did something else. They followed their prey. She paused, letting the words sink in. They followed it for hours. For days, if necessary. They tracked it across the landscape, never letting it rest, never letting it recover. Eventually, the prey would collapse from exhaustion, and then the humans would kill it. The council chamber had gone very quiet. They are persistence hunters, Yemeth continued. They evolved to chase things until those things could not run anymore. Their bodies are designed for endurance, not speed. Their minds are designed for patience, not aggression. When they start following something, they do not stop. They cannot stop. It is in their nature. Council leader Morath studied the thermal footage of the three humans walking across the desert. They looked so small, so fragile. But they were still moving, and his soldiers were dead. There is also a psychological component that we do not fully understand, Yemeth added. When humans are injured or exhausted, they are capable of continuing to function through sheer force of will. Their historical records show individuals completing physical competitions with broken bones. Soldiers continuing to fight with injuries that should have killed them. They have a term for it. They call it stubbornness. Stubbornness, Morath repeated. The translator rendered the word in a way that made it sound almost admirable. Our scientists believe it may be connected to certain chemicals in their brains that override normal pain and fatigue signals. When humans are sufficiently motivated, they can push their bodies far beyond safe limits. Many of them die from this tendency, but the ones who survive are extremely difficult to stop. The council considered this information in silence. The Valkyrie had conquered many species, but they had never encountered anything quite like this. Most prey species were predictable. They ran until they were tired, then they stopped. They sought shelter when conditions became dangerous. They prioritized survival above all else. Humans did not seem to follow these rules. What are your tactical recommendations? Morath asked. Yemeth took a deep breath. We have two options. First, we can overwhelm them immediately with superior numbers and firepower. Send cruisers, heavy weapons, everything we have. Destroy them before they can escape. Second, we can break off contact entirely and let them leave our space. And if we choose a middle path, A continued pursuit with moderate forces? Then we will lose, Yemeth said simply. Any prolonged conflict plays to their advantage. They are not the fastest or the strongest species we have encountered. But given enough time, they will simply still be coming when everyone else has stopped. The council voted for overwhelming force. 3 hours later, 3 Valkyrie cruisers descended through the atmosphere of Kalas 4. Their weapons were charged and ready. Their soldiers were fresh and eager for revenge. They would crush the humans quickly and completely, proving once and for all that the Valkyrie Empire was not to be challenged. The humans saw the cruisers coming. They did not try to fight. They did not try to surrender. They simply turned and ran into a nearby canyon system, disappearing into the maze of rocks and shadows, and the pursuit began again. The canyon system stretched for hundreds of kilometers, a maze of twisting passages and towering walls carved by ancient rivers that had dried up millions of years ago. The Valkyrie cruisers could not follow the humans into the narrow passages. Their soldiers had to continue on foot. Admiral Korath took personal command of the operation, determined to end this embarrassment quickly. He deployed 500 soldiers into the canyons, supported by aerial drones and ground-based vehicles. The humans would have nowhere to hide. They would be found, captured, and transported to the research facilities where scientists would study them until every secret of their strange endurance was understood. Hunt lasted 3 weeks. The humans moved through the canyons like ghosts. They left false trails and doubled back on their own tracks. They climbed walls that seemed impossible to climb and squeezed through gaps that should have been too narrow for their bodies. Whenever the Valkyrie soldiers got close, the humans simply slipped away into another passage and kept moving, and they never stopped. The soldiers worked in shifts, rotating fresh troops into the field while exhausted ones returned to base camp for rest. But the humans had no reinforcements. They were still the same 3 individuals who had crawled out of the crashed survey ship months ago. By all logic, they should have collapsed from exhaustion long ago. They did not collapse. Instead, they adapted. They learned to find water in the canyons, digging into the sand where underground moisture collected. They caught small animals for food, strange desert creatures that had never seen humans before. They salvaged equipment from Valkyrie soldiers who collapsed and could not get up again. And they kept the 6 prisoners they had captured, forcing them to walk alongside until even those hardened soldiers began to develop the same terrible endurance as their captors. They are changing. One of the prisoners reported through a secret communication channel. At first, I could not walk for more than a few hours at a time. My body would not allow it. But they made me keep going. They gave me water and made me walk. Now I can go for days. I do not understand it, but my body is adapting to their pace. Admiral Korath found this report deeply disturbing. The idea that humans could transform other species into versions of themselves was not something he had considered. He ordered more soldiers into the canyons. The weeks turned into months. The seasons on Kalas 4 began to shift. The brutal heat of summer gave way to the cold winds of autumn. The canyons became wet with early rains, and the humans adjusted their behavior accordingly. They moved into the northern highlands, where rocky terrain provided natural shelter from the weather and from Valkyrie drones. The aerial surveillance became less effective. The humans had learned to move at night, when thermal sensors had difficulty distinguishing them from the cooling rocks around them. They had learned to stay under overhangs and in caves, where satellites could not track them. They had learned to be patient, sometimes staying hidden for days at a time before suddenly covering great distances in a single pushed out. The Valkyrie could not match this patience. Soldiers rotated through the 4 bases, each group more frustrated than the last. The humans had become something between a joke and a nightmare. Junior officers told stories about them around campfires. half believing that they were facing something supernatural rather than three ordinary members of an alien species. "They do not sleep," one soldier insisted. "I watched them for 3 days through a thermal scope. They never stop moving. Not once. They eat rocks," claimed another. "I found their camp, and there was nothing there but stone. No food, no supplies, nothing. They must survive on something that we cannot detect." These stories were not true, but they reflected a deeper truth that the Valkyrie were beginning to understand. The humans were not supernatural. They were just designed for a kind of conflict that the Valkyrie had never imagined by the 6th month. The humans had moved into the frozen tundra of the northern regions. The Valkyrie soldiers struggled with the cold. Their bodies adapted for the temperate and warm zones of their homeworld. Equipment malfunctioned. Vehicles became stuck in snow and ice. Drones crashed when their sensors froze. The humans walked through the snow like it was nothing. They had somehow made clothing from the pelts of animals they had hunted along the way. They had built fire-starting tools from salvaged Valkyrie equipment. They had done what the biological reports said they would do. They had adapted. Admiral Korath stood on the bridge of his cruiser and stared at the holographic map showing the humans' movement patterns over the past 6 months. The small dots representing their positions formed a wandering line across half the continent to desert and canyon and highland and tundra. It was impossible. It was absurd. But it was real. "They are not trying to escape anymore," his tactical officer observed quietly. Korath nodded. He had noticed the same thing. The humans' movements had changed in recent weeks. They were no longer running away from the Valkyrie positions. They were circling around them, moving toward supply depots, approaching communication stations. "They are hunting us," Korath said. The words felt strange in his mouth. The Valkyrie were hunters. They had always been hunters. The idea that they could become prey to creatures they had considered weak and helpless was almost impossible to accept. But the evidence was undeniable. The humans had started raiding Valkyrie positions. They would appear at night, disable equipment, steal supplies, and vanish before anyone could respond. They never stayed to fight. They never gave the Valkyrie soldiers a chance to use their superior numbers and firepower. They just took what they needed and kept moving. Always moving. Always coming. The soldiers began to break down. Not from injuries, but from fear. They reported seeing human shapes on the horizon at all hours. They heard footsteps in the darkness when nothing was there. Some refused to leave the bases at all, preferring punishment to the terror of facing an enemy that would never stop. The humans had become the nightmare that followed you no matter how far you ran. The conflict that military historians would later call the Kellis Incident entered its final phase in the 11th month. Admiral Korath had lost over 200 soldiers to exhaustion, exposure, accidents, and the quiet terror that came from being hunted by something that never tired. The humans had grown stronger. The Valkyrie had grown weaker. The 3 survivors from the crashed survey ship were no longer alone. Their 6 Valkyrie prisoners had been transformed by months of forced marching into something new. Creatures that had somehow learned to push past the limits of their own biology. And the humans had accumulated enough salvaged equipment to build a communication device powerful enough to reach passing ships. When a human merchant vessel detected their signal, the response was immediate. Within 2 weeks, a small fleet of human military ships arrived at the edge of the Kellis system. They did not attack. They simply waited, their weapons powered down, their shields inactive. A single message was transmitted to the Valkyrie command station. "We are here for our people. Return them, and we leave in peace. Keep them, and we stay." Admiral Korath understood the threat beneath those simple words. The humans would not fight a quick battle. They would not seek a decisive victory. They would do what they had been doing for 11 months. They would follow. They would persist. They would wear down the Valkyrie forces until there was nothing left. The council debated for 3 days before agreeing to negotiate. The ceasefire ceremony was held on neutral ground, a small space station at the edge of the system. Admiral Korath represented the Valkyrie Empire. The humans sent survey specialist Chun, the woman who had led the 3 survivors through 11 months of impossible pursuit. Korath studied her carefully as she entered the conference room. She was thin, her face marked by months of hardship and exposure to the elements. Her clothes were a patchwork of human fabrics and Valkyr materials, sewn together with rough stitches. She walked with a slight limp from an injury that had never fully healed, but her eyes were clear and steady, and her body seemed incapable of standing still. Even as she took her seat at the negotiating table, her feet shifted slightly. Her fingers tapped against her leg. Her head turned to scan the room. She was constantly moving, constantly alert, constantly ready. The negotiations were brief. The Valkyrie agreed to release any claim on the crashed survey ship and its crew. The humans agreed to leave Valkyrie space without further conflict. Both sides agreed to establish a communication channel for future diplomatic contact. As the formal ceremony concluded, Korath found himself walking beside Chun toward the shuttle bay. He had one question that he needed to ask, even though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I must understand," he said through his translator. "Your species is not superior to ours in any measurement we can identify. You are not faster. You are not stronger. You do not have better weapons or armor or senses. How did 3 of you defeat an army?" Chun stopped walking and turned to face him. She was shorter than most of the Valkyrie around her, her body seemingly fragile compared to their armored forms. But there was something in her expression that made Korath want to step back. "Do you know where my species comes from, Admiral?" Korath nodded. "A small planet in an unremarkable system. We have studied your world. Then you know that our planet tried to kill us. Everything on that rock was designed to make us suffer. The weather changed without warning. The predators were faster and stronger than us. The plants were poisonous. The water was contaminated. The diseases were constant. We had nothing going for us. Nothing except one thing." She smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. "We refused to die. We looked at all the things that wanted to kill us, and we decided that we would simply keep going until we won. That is what we do. That is what we have always done. You can run from a human. You can hide from a human. But eventually, you have to stop. And when you do..." She shrugged, a gesture that somehow contained 11 months of walking, of suffering, of refusing to give up. "We will still be coming." Korath said nothing. There was nothing to say. Chun boarded her shuttle and left the station. Within hours, the human fleet departed the system, carrying the 3 survivors and their 6 Valkyrie prisoners back to human space. Korath watched them go, thinking about everything he had learned. In the weeks that followed, the Conclave of Strategic Intelligence prepared a comprehensive report on the Kellis incident. They analyzed every aspect of the conflict, from the initial crash to the final negotiation. They interviewed survivors, studied medical data, reviewed tactical records. The final conclusion was simple and terrifying. Humans were not the most advanced species in the galaxy. They were not the most powerful or the most intelligent. They did not have the best technology or the strongest military. But they possessed something that the Valkyrie had never considered a weapon. They did not stop. No matter how long the pursuit lasted. No matter how difficult the conditions became. No matter how overwhelming the odds seemed, humans simply refused to give up. They would walk through deserts and canyons and frozen wastelands. They would suffer injury and exhaustion and deprivation. They would watch their companions fall and keep going. They would face entire armies with nothing but their own stubborn will, and eventually they would win. Not through superior strength, but through the simple mathematics of endurance. Humans could sustain effort that no other species could match. In any conflict that lasted more than a few days, they held an advantage that could not be overcome. The report recommended reclassifying humanity from minor territorial concern to strategic threat. Attrition class. A new section was added to the military guidelines, warning all commanders about the dangers of prolonged engagement with human forces. The official recommendation was never formally adopted, but it was widely circulated among officers throughout the fleet. Do not start prolonged conflicts with humans. They will not stop. They cannot be exhausted. They will walk through fire and ice and vacuum itself if given sufficient motivation. Make peace quickly or do not make war. Admiral Korath kept a copy of the report in his personal files. Sometimes late at night, he would read through it again, remembering the three small figures walking across the desert, never stopping, never resting, always coming. He had learned something important on Kellis 4. He had learned that sometimes the most dangerous enemy was not the one with the biggest weapons or the fastest ships. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one who simply refused to quit. Humans were that enemy, and the galaxy would have to learn to live with them, one way or another.